Welcome. So, a reflection for Good Friday. There won't be an hour's foot at the cross meditation in our church this year, and I don't imagine there'll be many 3-hour meditations that are sometimes found in churches to be viewed on the internet either. But yet we do need to reflect and think about the events of that first, what has become known as Good Friday. So we'll do that in a moment by reflecting on a reading from John's Gospel. If we were to be in our churches, no doubt, as I've done in past years, I would have found some images for us to look at on our big screen in the church. No big screen, but a small image here that you can see. A painting from Edvard Munch, famous for his painting of The Scream. In 1900, he painted this, entitled Golgotha. Note the lack of social distancing. Yet the wider crowd are looking out at you, at me, to see what our reaction is to Jesus, who is pictured there as the naked fool upon the cross. For me, the painting reinforces that had I been present there on Good Friday, that yes, I too would have been part of that crowd looking on, cheering. The painting also reminds me of my need for Jesus to have died on the cross, and that need is just as big now as it was for Munch back in 1900. In fact, it's the same as it has been for all of us over the years. I wonder what you would draw from that image for yourselves. As we consider that painting, let me read some verses from the Bible. John chapter 19, verses 16 to 27. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. Here they crucified him, and with 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a cross prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read the sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews," but this man claimed to be King of the Jews. Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, divided them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. "Let's not tear it," they said to one another. "Let's decide by lot who will get it." This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled, which said, "They divided my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing." So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Dear woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From this time on, this disciple took her into his home. Later, knowing that all was now completed, and so that the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. So a king is led out to die. A king is stripped naked and hung to die. He died being mocked, looked upon as a naked fool rather than a king. But a king he is. Jesus is king. His rule, his kingdom was challenged that first Good Friday on the cross, but Jesus remains a king, evidenced by his resurrection from the dead. In this short reading, we hear afresh of his kingly nature. Jesus, King of the Jews, the notice above his head read. As Jesus did rise from the dead, so his kingly reign continues. Do we accept that Jesus is our King? A king with authority over us, a king with authority to support us. Today, we can be assured of his kingly reign over all our confusion in the face of the coronavirus epidemic. Ultimately, King Jesus, holds control over all creation, seen and unseen. Yes, in that reading, there is also the tender moment of the suffering Jesus placing his mother into his best friend's care. Yes, there is a clear sign here that the earthly Jesus most certainly understands what it means to suffer. Yet more than that, Jesus' kingly reign brings us face to face with the reality of eternity. To rise from the dead, well, that demonstrates Jesus' divine nature too. Earth and heaven meet, and the opportunity for eternal living is found at the foot of the cross. And the reality of eternity is seen in the last three words that John records Jesus as saying. It is finished. It is finished. What Jesus came to do as the Son of God, the King of all creation, entering into human experience, was finished there on the cross. The divine security update, the fix that affects the whole of creation throughout time happens. That is what is finished on the cross. The consequences that should rightly be ours as we move away from the relationship that we can have with God, that consequence is put right through Jesus' death. This enables us to have a friendship with God, with Jesus, our King. It can assure us of the reality of eternity. Yes, we may well have stood that first Good Friday at the foot of the cross jeering. Yet what happens on the cross allows us to be assured that God is with us, that he understands the horror of suffering, and that we may be assured of the reality of eternity. Now, what do I mean by assured? We can be assured of this for three reasons. Firstly, because the Bible story, what is recognised as a historic document by many, many ancient historic scholars, because it's written there in the Bible, we can know that to be true. That was the experience also written about in the Bible by the early church in the book of Acts, and the people that we read in the book of Acts truly experienced that. Secondly, the experience of those that have followed Jesus from that time on up to the present time reflects that. And lastly, our own lived experience, the stories that we can tell to one another within our own church community, experience that too of God's activity, ongoing activity in our lives. That can give assurance that what happened on the cross is real. Yes, Jesus was crucified some 2,000 years ago. That is a historic fact. Yes, we would have been there, jeering in the crowd, just like those in Munch's painting. Yes, Jesus suffered there and most certainly understands what it is to suffer. Yes, something deeply profound happens on the cross that allows us to reach into eternity, and all because Jesus is a king and wants us to worship him as such, our divine king. On Sunday, we will celebrate Jesus' resurrection from the dead, the proof of the pudding, so to speak, of both Jesus' divinity and kingship. In the events of that first Good Friday, we also see Jesus' kingship and divinity firmly rooted there too. So just who do you say Jesus is? The naked fool of Munch's painting, or our divine king? The evidence is there to support the latter. Jesus is our king. Today, world events make this an unsettling time. Yet may the issues of divine kingship bring real encouragement and hope to us today.